Konnichiwa, Ibra Army, and welcome back to another IBRACORP video. In today's world, we're all using technology to help us get where we need to go, quicker and more efficient than ever. The line between consumer, prosumer, and enterprise slowly begins to diminish as more and more people try to self-host things that are above the typical level of experience and skills. That's why we need to find modern problems and give them modern solutions. And as time goes on, we move from using traditional software and resources to looking into more advanced, more complicated, but overall, more efficient forms of getting our information across the internet and to the world. Thinking of the internet as roads, we can imagine that data moving through these pipelines, just like cars in traffic, need to find their way in the most efficient way possible. For example, we use tools like Google Maps to tell us what the quickest way is through a traffic jam to get to where we need to go. In some cases, we have a traffic cop sitting in the middle of an intersection, pointing the traffic to where they need to go and when they can go. That's why today we're going to be showing you one of the most hotly requested topics, and we're going to show it to you so that everyone can hopefully understand how to use and implement this tool for your own setup, either at home or for your business. Today, we're going to be looking at traffic. It's a subject that's eluded us for quite some time, and it's a very complicated topic when you first encounter the documentation or the application itself. I'm sure anyone here who's actually jumped in and used traffic themselves, or tried to give it a go at least, could have found it pretty intimidating at first, trying to understand all of its different terminologies and technology that it uses in order to get a reverse proxy up and running. But I'm hoping after today's video, you guys will agree that it's actually not that complicated when it's explained correctly. On top of that, we're going to show you extra tidbits that match in with all of our documentation so far to date. And for those who have deployed things like Authelia, we're going to show you how to apply Authelia over your subdomains using traffic. And you're going to see exactly how easy it is to really secure stuff without having to copy and paste a config file in each single proxy, wherein something like Nginx Proxy Manager or Swag comes involved. With traffic, we have a variety of different versatile tools that we can use. Simply applying labels to our Docker containers will get us where we need to go. So, if you've had traffic on your wishlist for quite some time, you wanted to dig in and give it a try, but you just haven't had the chance, or you felt like you didn't have the time to put into it to try and understand everything, then we've got the video for you here today. So thanks for coming and checking out the video. We hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, let's just get stuck into it. So guys, thank you very much for coming in this week. It's a pleasure to have you back. I know this subject has been requested for quite some time, basically since we started the channel, and we've covered two other major reverse proxies, which are Nginx Proxy Manager and Swag now. And traffic is another one that we're going to add to our list of reverse proxies that we've covered, with some others in future, but we think traffic is probably going to be the most requested one in terms of trying to understand its complexity and making it easy to get. And I guarantee you guys, by the time you get through our guide, we're going to really help you figure this out. It's going to be smooth as butter. Now, before we start, I have to give some credits because this is one of our projects that takes us quite some time to develop. In fact, it's actually taken a few months to develop this one. So just a quick shout out to a couple of people before we get started. In the credits section on our documentation, we'd like to thank Hawks. Hawks has basically run this project single-handedly, managing all the different resources that we can use, and he's worked very closely with our community member Bosun. Thank you very much for all your input. We couldn't have done it without you. Bosun is an expert in traffic, and that's what he's brought to the table. So often we will work with our community members who are experts in a certain field, and if they're willing to, they help us and give us a lot of information that they are experts in. So then we can work together and make that more user-friendly for our community, so that we can get more guides out there. So thank you very much, Bosun. We really appreciate it. You will find Bosun's Twitter link in the guide so that you can thank him yourself if you like as well. But also, we've got Hawks here, so make sure you check out Hawks on GitHub if you like. If you want to help support Hawks for his work on this one specifically, you can. Otherwise, any support you provide to IBRACORP will also help as well. And also to our beta team, we do have a beta team, guys, which we'll do an announcement soon for a new recruitment drive. But we have a team of beta testers, which are basically community members who have put their hand up to say they want to try stuff out. And that helps us get our guides written up and ready, dispatched and out to everyone in the most efficient way possible. And it helps us test things out before we get it out there. So we like to cross-check our work as much as we can in the time we're given. And again, we're all volunteers, including our beta team. So thank you very much, beta team, for your help on this one. We really appreciate you. So with that said, we can now start looking at Traefik. So if you don't know what it is, what is Traefik? Well, according to their own words, it's the world's most popular cloud-native application, Proxy. It's a mouthful already. That helps developers and ops teams build, deploy, and run modern microservices applications quickly and easily. Long story short, guys, it does act as a reverse proxy. Now, Traefik as a whole has different branches and different things that it actually does, especially when it comes to an enterprise environment. Today, we are only going to be looking at Traefik Proxy. I will also add towards the end something about Traefik Pilot, so you guys can have a quick understanding of that as well. So what are our assumptions? Now, in case you don't know, this doc will be live when the video goes live, so be sure to read through the documentation very thoroughly. We'll do everything we can, but sometimes we miss stuff. So if we do, we'll have a link in the sidebar here that will allow you to submit an edit, and we will merge it if we think it's appropriate. For the assumptions, we are looking for people who have the community apps installed, which I've hyperlinked our video for that. You're using Cloudflare as your DNS, also our video is hyperlinked there. And optionally, if you have Authelia, we will show you how to use Authelia with Traefik so that it's all ready to go. Now, I assure you that using this method with Traefik, Authelia will work really, really easily, and we always highly recommend it. It really helps protect your infrastructure. It will be a massive time saver for you if you get it set up. Now, looking in the documentation, we have a very detailed description of what Traefik is and how it works. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. It's an open source edge router, and it makes publishing services fun and an easy experience. It receives requests on behalf of your system and finds out which components are responsible for handling them. What sets Traefik apart, besides its many features, is that it automatically discovers the right config for your services. That happens by Traefik basically inspecting our infrastructure, finds the relevant info, and discovers which service serves which request. So in our case, we're going to be showing you Docker and how to proxy a VM as well. And basically with the Docker side of things, we apply a label to a Docker container, and Traefik will already know what to do with it because of how we've configured it in the config file. So a little bit more details there, but I'm going to keep going because it is a very big subject. So we have some good images there to help you understand what's going on. I will also note that we are going to show you two different installation methods. In today's video, I will mostly show you the Unraid installation method. However, Hawks has worked very, very hard to make sure we've got a Docker Compose version as well. So for those who are running Docker Compose, you can still watch our video and see how we're doing things. But for your specific config files and instructions, we have a completely different section here just for that. So I highly recommend you check out both options. If you're using Unraid, just stick to one. But Docker Compose, guys, you've got that as well. And just to let you know, in 2022, we are going to be moving towards more of this Docker Compose stuff. So we hope you guys really enjoy that because it's going to be really exciting to look into more Docker Compose stuff for you guys. Now in here, if you look at Bosun's username, you can see his Twitter's been linked. So be sure to check that out if you like. And we've got all of our usual links. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to follow the documentation off screen and you guys can follow along. And basically we'll be able to run it through together. So starting here on Unraid, let's get going. Let's see how we go. Beautiful. So we're in our Unraid server now, our beautiful looking Unraid server, Osiris. And we've seen him many times. He comes in every video pretty much lately. And we've got a couple of things that we want to start off with. So the first thing is, I'll just let you know how we've got this set up. Okay, so then you can compare it to your own setup. So right now, I'm using Nginx Proxy Manager, and I've got the Cloudflare tunnel running as well. It talks to NPM, and NPM is what's reverse proxying our stuff. Well, what we want to do is set up Traefik. Now to do that, we can do it with and without the tunnel. If you guys are following our video on the tunnel and you have your tunnel established, you can still use Traefik so that we don't have to open ports 80 and 443 on our router or firewall. If you don't want to use the tunnel or you're not using the tunnel, then you can also use our guide to just basically open the ports and do it that way. If you haven't seen our Cloudflare tunnel video, be sure to check that out. So let's start with the App Store. Head over to the App Store. And on the App Store, at the moment, you're going to see our container template right at the top. But if you don't, just search for Traefik. And obviously it's Traefik. and you'll see our image there. So let's click on that. It's got a bit of a description on what's going on. We've got our link to our documentation page, and we've also got our Discord. So be sure to jump in our Discord and have a chat with us if you need some help. We'll do our best to help you guys out. First things first, let's click on install. Install will bring us to our template page, and on here we need to make a few changes. So first thing, looking at our network type. At the moment it's on bridge. What we want to do is put that on our custom Docker network. If you don't know how to do that, we have a video on doing that. Then we'll start running through the different parameters and variables that we've got configured. So the config folder, by default, it's app data / Traefik. So we'll leave that as is. We've got our Docker socket. We don't need to change that. We can leave it as is as well. The HTTPS port. So 443, what do you want that mapped to? We've put in by default 44301. Just see if that's free on your system. Same goes for 8001, which is for port 80. So if you're using port 44301, change it to something else. Same goes for this one. Okay, but just remember what it is, because we'll need to put that either in our tunnel config, or we'll need to put it in our port forwarding if you're using that method. Then we have our web UI port. So where do we want the web UI to come up? The web UI is completely optional. I will also note that the web UI for Traefik is simply a read-only interface made to be just a dashboard that you can check in on stuff with, but it won't allow you to do any of sort of the config or anything. That's all done in the config files and with labels. But if you're interested in that, go for it. Now, the Cloudflare API token. So we need an API token. That's the first thing that we're gonna have to get started with. So let's head over to Cloudflare while we've got this up, open a new tab and head to Cloudflare. So sign into Cloudflare, go to your domain. You'll be confronted with this page here. Now, if we scroll down, you'll see your zone ID and account ID. I've blanked those out on my screen, but you'll see yours there. All you need to do is click on Get Your API Token. So click on that. On the API token page, you'll see a whole bunch of different options here. What we are not using is the global API, so don't use that one. It's less secure. What we want to do is set up a specific token for this purpose. So what we'll do is click on Create a Token. So once you click Create, we now need to create the token. Now it's got a couple of templates there. We're not going to worry about the templates. Just click on Create Custom Token. In the name, we'll give it a name. We'll just call that Traefik. Under the permissions, we'll apply the following. So in here, we'll go to zone settings and read. We'll add zone itself, read. One more, zone, DNS, edit, and then under zone resources, we'll leave that as include all zones. Leave everything else the same, and then go to continue to summary. It'll give us a summary, and then it will ask us to create the token. So go ahead and create the token, and here's our token. I will note to you guys that this token is super secret, so make sure you do not reveal this token. Obviously, in my case, I will be changing it after the video is finished. So we'll click copy, come back to your Unraid template or your Docker Compose file and paste that in here. So what is the token? Why do we need it? So the reason why we need it is so that Traefik can use our Cloudflare account to verify the domain is ours. This allows us to validate and create our Let's certificates and verifies our authenticity for the domain. So it's just a lot easier than trying HTTP validation or anything like that. A lot of people get tripped up with that, so we just do this method and it makes it a lot easier. The next field we've got is the Traefik dashboard subdomain. By default, we've just put in traefik.domain.com, so we obviously want to change that. And in my case, I'm going to call this IBRACORP.io. And before I do that, we need to make sure this DNS exists. So back in our Cloudflare account, you'll see here I have quite a complicated setup for our DNS entries, but you can ignore all this. Basically, we've got our Traefik CNAME set up and it's pointing to our subdomain. Now in this scenario, it's pointing to a specific setup I've made so that we can do the video today. But in your case, it's pointing to wherever your tunnel is. So if you're using the tunnel, this is where my tunnel lives. So I usually would point it to here. So you can either point that to your A record, whatever that might be, or if you're using the tunnel, whichever CNAME you have for your tunnel address. Point it to there so that we've got that ready to go. We then have the Traefik entry point, which is HTTPS. And just to explain what that's doing, if we click on edit here, we can see what label or what key is being used. So what this label is doing, if you want to think of entry points as literally an entry point or a gate into your infrastructure, it's basically taking the HTTP entry point, so anything coming in on that 80, and we want it to be HTTPS. So then it's saying, I want you to make it HTTPS before it will be accepted. We then have the Traefik API. You don't need to change that. Routing traffic to its API dashboard. Authelia protection. Now, if you guys are not using Authelia, you can remove this line. If you are using Authelia, leave that in here. You don't need to change it. Then whether you want to enable or disable the dashboard. So like I said, the dashboard is read only. If you don't think you're going to use it, then just set it to false and you should be right. Now that's pretty much it for our initial template. It's ready to go. Once we're done, go ahead and click apply. So now back in our Docker tab, we can see Traefik is running. It started, but I guarantee you not much is going on in there. And as you can see in the logs, it's completely blank. So what we're going to do is just stop the container for now. We don't need it running, and then we'll carry on with the guide. The next thing we need to do now is create a file called a acme.json. And this stores the SSL cert information so that it can be secure. Now it also needs specific permissions so that that file cannot be modified or read by any unauthorized parties. So what we can do is open the terminal here, and we've got the commands in the written guide for you, so you can just copy and paste it. But what we're going to do is paste it here. We've got the make directory for app data Traefik. That's done. Now let's create a blank file and change the permissions. So we've also got that command in our documentation. We'll paste that. We're going to create the file, then we're going to change the permissions to 600 on that file. Done. So with that done, we can go look in the directory that we've created those in. Now guys, if you haven't seen our last video that we put out last week on code server, I highly recommend it. And here's going to be the perfect reason why. We can basically start editing in our browser without having to mess around with file shares. So here we are in the app data location. I might just click refresh, make sure we've got the latest stuff. Then we've got Traefik right there. Now under Traefik, we need to create two files. So let's create a new file and we'll call that first one traefik.yml, hit enter. And then we're going to create another file in the same folder and we're going to call that file and then capital C for config.yml and hit enter again. So we've got two files that we've just created and we've got our JSON file there as well. Now in our guide, we have explained very thoroughly, Hawks has done a great job explaining the files and what they're doing. So they break them down into different sections. The two files are very unique in the sense that the traefik.yml is a static file. So that file will not change if you change it on the fly. You'll need to restart Traefik for it to apply those changes. However, all the stuff that's dynamic in this dynamic file that we've created will actually load as you change stuff. So as it's, if you add a new middleware or anything like that, it will update it live straight away. You don't have to restart the container. You can imagine in a business sense is really important because you want minimal downtime. It doesn't really make sense to be sitting there restarting containers that are hosting all of your web services. First things first, let's head into the Traefik YML and start configuring that. The first part is the global parameters. So we'll copy this from our guide. This is all in there for you guys. We've made it as easy as possible so that you can just click it and paste it in. But we've gone to the effort of explaining each part so that you understand exactly what it's doing. So here's our first part, a global check new version. We've got the global parameter. We want to check for new versions. Do we want to send anonymous usage? We've marked it as false. Change it to whatever you like. The next setting is to allow insecure backend connections. So let's paste that in here. We've got service transport, insecure skip verify is true. Usually these connections are done either via the internal Docker network or over a secure LAN. This setting allows Traefik to connect to that and use HTTPS by default, but maybe do not have a valid certificate. So allowing for this insecure backend will allow Traefik to connect to the app and give it a secure front end connection. The next part we're going to configure is the entry points. So let's come down a line and we'll put in the entry points here. So I'll copy this from our guide and we'll start working through that together. Entry points are the network entry points into Traefik. So like I said earlier, they are the gates to your infrastructure via Traefik. They define the port which will receive the packets and whether to listen for TCP or UDP as well. This configuration is basically telling Traefik where and how to accept the incoming connections. For the HTTP requests, we want Traefik to accept them on the port 80, but we also want it to redirect them to HTTPS. So if you look at the rule here, we've got HTTP, port 80. What are we doing with HTTP? I want you to redirect it. Where do we want to redirect it to? To this entry point. What's the entry point called? HTTPS. All right, excellent. Where's this HTTPS configured? Right here. So the HTTPS entry point then says, we're on 443, take HTTP, we're going to apply Let's Encrypt certificate. It's going to be for these domains, and we're also going to apply this security header on top. Now we can set any middlewares we want to use by default. In our example, we're just setting one, which is for headers, and it's explained later. If you want any other middlewares to be loaded for all requests, this is where you will add them. So the perfect example of this is if you wanted Authelia applied on everything, straight off the bat, everything coming through Traefik has to go to Authelia so that you don't have to add a specific label to every single container. You can just add it in here as a middleware. So we can just go middleware space and just go auth at file. So then I don't have to go into each container and add the Authelia label. I can pretty much, everything will just go through there no matter what. But for today's example, I'm going to leave that out. That's something that you can do if you like. Obviously, we need to change our domain. So make sure we change our domain to match your domain. Having a read through that, that looks correct. So we're pretty happy with that. Now, the next part is providers. Now, providers discover the service that live on our infrastructure. And the idea is that Traefik queries those provider APIs in order to find relevant info about routing. And when it detects a change, it dynamically updates the routes. So that's what makes it a little bit more intelligent than other reverse proxies. The file provider lets you define the dynamic config, which we've created here under file config.yaml. Now we could add them all into this Traefik YML, but to separate them is actually better so that we can have a specific area for that dynamic config stuff. But nevertheless, we'll copy that configuration here, we'll back it up, and we'll drop it down. And then now we've got our providers section. Now the next setting is one of the clever features of Traefik and allows us to dynamically and automatically add new apps by only adding a few labels to the app. The Docker settings we're showing you here will tell Traefik to watch the Docker network for new apps. And once it detects a new app, it will look for certain labels. And we're configuring those labels later on. So let's have a read through that briefly here. You can see the file name. So that's the file that we created earlier. And this is the Docker settings that we're going to use. So we're saying, I want you to watch Docker and I want you to look for this network. Now, very important. If you haven't created your custom Docker network, or if you've got a different name for your custom Docker network, you need to make sure you update that part. So in my case, it's actually called IBRACORP. All right, so I'm going to change that to IBRACORP. Make sure you change it to whatever your custom Docker network is. Now we have our rule. What's our default rule? So you can set the rule on each individual app if you like and say, okay, unmanic, I want you to be forced to come through at unmanic.ibracorp.io. Or perhaps I want it to be unmanic2.ibracorp. However, we can set a default rule so that we don't have to set it on every single app and it will follow this rule. So trim prefix is going by our container name, followed by the domain name. In which case, make sure that your container name matches what subdomain you're using. Now the swarm mode refresh seconds is 15, so every 15 seconds it will scan the Docker socket and give us fresh information on what it's picking up and where it needs to send it to. So you can always rely on it to be constantly checking and making sure services are up and where it needs to direct the traffic. The next section we're going to add is for the Traefik dashboard. So if I go back, we paste that here. We've got enable Traefik UI, API is set to true and insecure is set to true. If you do not want to use the dashboard, set them to false and you don't have to worry about it. The next section we're going to add, so as you guys can see, we're building this up to be how we want it to be used. Just keep in mind, this is our guide. We're showing you how to get going with it, what to do to, get your head around it and explain how it all works. But this is totally up to you. You can change this around. You can look through the official documentation, which we highly suggest, because there's a lot more that you can put in here if you like, and more versatility. But I think if we went through every single thing, it would be overcomplicated, and there's plenty of those guides out there already. So we're trying to do something different by making this as easy as possible. So anyway, we've got the log here, and we've got 3 levels you can choose. You can choose info, debug, or error. Debug will give you very detailed logs. So if you're having trouble getting it working, I highly suggest you change this to debug here and then restart Traefik and you'll get a lot more details. But we'll leave it on info for now. The next section we're going to add below that is our Let's Encrypt SSL certificates. Now, in order for us to do that, we need to define the resolver. So we've done that here by saying Let's Encrypt is our resolver, and it's responsible for retrieving the certificates from the Acme server. Traefik will automatically track the expiry date of our certificates it generates, and if there's less than 30 days remaining before it expires, Traefik will attempt to renew it automatically, which is great. And again, by having our Cloudflare provider set up for the DNS challenge, we're going to avoid a lot of the issues in terms of trying to renew it, because it will always be able to verify us through the API. So we're telling Traefik that we want to use Cloudflare to make the DNS challenge request and also to use Cloudflare as the DNS resolver. Now in here, change this to whatever you want. Now in my case, I want it to be admin, for example, admin at IBRACORP.io. Storage we can leave the same, Cloudflare we don't have to change, and then the resolvers we don't have to change at all. So that's the Traefik YML complete. We can pretty much leave that. Now if you're using Code Server, it's thankfully been saving for us as we go. So again, big props to the Code Server. It's a cool as hell application. So now we're going to configure the file config.yml. Now this is a, like I said, dynamic file, meaning that if we make any changes to it, Traefik will pick them up and load them automatically. We don't need to restart Traefik for that to work. We'll also use this file to manage all the middlewares and also add any external services like VMs. Because the label part of things we're going to be using for Docker, you might have some VMs that you want to reverse proxy as well. So we're going to show you how to do that here. The first thing we're going to add is routers and services. I'll just quickly explain how that works for you. And using the official documentation images, it just helps explain stuff a little bit better. So the router here, the router is in charge of connecting incoming requests to the services that can handle them. So we've got our entry point, then we've got our routers, and then the service, and then the server itself, okay? Because you can have multiple and set them up as load balancing, so that if one goes down, the other one's already. The services are responsible for configuring how to reach the actual services that will eventually handle the incoming requests. So to add an external VM, we need to give Traefik a router, right here, which tells Traefik how to route the requests and which middleware to use along the way. Now, for me personally, the way I like to understand this to get my head around it was, think of router is literally the route, okay? We're trying to tell it how to route this traffic and to where. And middleware is, as it says, in the middle between the two, giving it a certain rule or some sort of validation that we want to apply over the top. For example, Authelia, and then where to point it afterwards as well. So in any case, let's paste this from our guide, and we've got HTTP going to Home Assistant. That's our example that we've put in there for you. It doesn't have to be Home Assistant. You might have something else. Now in my case, I actually have AdGuard, for example, running. So what we can do is say AdGuard, routing. What do we want to call this router? I will call it AdGuard. The entry points, the rule, the Home Assistant. Make sure our subdomain matches. So in fact, that's not correct. So then I'll change it to match what I need it to. And we're also giving it the name of the service. Now I haven't configured the service yet, it's down here. So what we need to do is also update our service. So I think something I'll quickly touch on while we were doing testing with the beta team, until we did fix it in the end, but there was an issue where we couldn't get to the Traefik UI with the default entries. So in a scenario where you want to reverse proxy something, for some reason it's not working with Docker labels, whatever the case might be, you can pretty much come in here, create a router and a service exactly like this, and just point it to where you need to go, and it will do the same thing. Obviously that's a little bit more intensive than just adding a Docker label, but it does the same thing, and it's dynamic like I said. So this file, as soon as you do it, this file will be accepted by Traefik and generated. So let's change this as well. I will change this to AdGuard service so that we can route that. We come down a little further, it's going to ask for our IP address. What's our IP address for AdGuard? It's actually 125 and then 80. So that's what our AdGuard looks like. So I've just configured AdGuard as a VM, and I want to reverse proxy that VM. Now the next thing is our middleware. So like I said, middleware is something that we can manually add to each service. Attached to the routers, pieces of middleware are a means of tweaking the requests before they're sent to your service, or before the answer from the services are sent back to the clients. So it works both ways. And there's several available middleware in Traefik. Some can modify the request, the headers, some are in charge of redirections, authentication, etc. Now, middlewares that use the same protocol can be combined into chains to fit every scenario. So we're going to use these to do many things, including adjusting headers to secure the app, or even forward the request to Authelia. So what I'm going to do is copy the next part of the config file, and we'll drop that in here. So as you can see, we've then broken down to middlewares, which is below this, followed by our Authelia configuration. We've got auth, the forward auth, and where we want to send it to. Now there's a few things that we need to pay attention to here. This part here is the name of our Authelia container. So if your Authelia container is named auth, then you can leave that. In my case, it's got the full name, so Authelia. Then comes your domain. Is this the domain that you usually use for Authelia, and is that what you've configured? If you followed our Authelia guide, mind you, we were one of the first to actually create a guide for Authelia, so we have the most detail on it. Be sure to follow that through and give it the right name. Now in my case, I actually called this identity.ibracorp.io. So you just want to make sure that that's correct. The next part is also for the auth basic. We want to make sure that's correct as well. So the container name is Authelia, not auth. If you are not using a custom Docker network, you're going to have some trouble because this is not going to work. Okay, you'll end up needing the IP address instead of the container name, but we highly recommend you guys use a custom Docker network. Again, we did a video on it, so be sure to check it out. It's like 1 minute long. Now, the next part we're going to add to this file is the headers. So if we go back and we add this part in, we can see we've got security headers here. And that's part of the middlewares as well. Now the headers middleware manages the headers of requests and responses. Now with this configuration that we've given you, we'll be using it to add a secure header to all requests. Using the below, we're able to take our SSL score up to an A+ without compromising the functionality of our apps. This will help towards keeping your apps secure. So as explained in our entry point section, Traefik YML, we added this middleware to be used by default for all requests that are passing through Traefik. So it's another thing that will be the default rule that you don't have to think about, that is protecting everything that you add to Traefik later. Now you shouldn't need to change anything in this header section. That should be perfectly fine as it is. Now guess what guys? You've just configured Traefik. This is pretty much Traefik configured when you really stop and think about it. We've got the Traefik YML done and we have our file config.yml done as well. So the next step or the next question you might have is, how do we proxy our first app? I'm glad you asked. So now that we're done with the config file, let's head back to Unraid. And what I'm going to do is actually just start up Traefik here. So with the container started, let's try and find a container that we want to reverse proxy. So let's start with Unmanic, for example. So we're in the container settings for Unmanic. If we come down and we get to the bottom, what we want to do is add a couple of labels. So click on add another path, port, variable, label. We'll click on label. In the name, we'll call that enable Traefik. We'll give it the key of Traefik.enable. And then we'll give it a value of true and true. Click add. Now we need to add another label, and this is to ensure that Traefik only allows the app to be proxied over HTTPS, okay? We don't want it going out there over port 80. So the key is here, which is in our written guide as well. Then we've got the value of HTTPS, and then we click on add. Now this is more secure because if something happens and HTTPS breaks for whatever reason, the redirection doesn't work, then it will not allow it to get out on port 80. It just stops those people that are preying on that scenario. Now at this point, you can add as many labels as you like, any of them that you're aware of and have configured. Otherwise, if you're happy with it, let's just click apply. Now with that done, let's go into our services here in the Traefik web UI. So you can see we've gone into the web UI, we'll click on services. You'll see straight away that Unmanic has actually popped up now. This wasn't here before, it's just straight away come up. Traefik has scanned the Docker socket and noticed that this label has been applied. So that should now be accessible for us, so let's try it. Now it wouldn't be a proper tech guide if we didn't show you the mistakes that we make as well. So under the Docker section here in the Traefik YML, I forgot to update a particular field, so that wasn't actually working. So if we go back here and we change that to the correct field that it's supposed to be, domain, and then we try again, keeping in mind that we've just made a change to the static file, so this one requires us to restart Traefik, we'll restart it, and then we should be able to access that subdomain now. So let's try that. Beautiful, I've refreshed it and there it is. So now it's being reverse proxied. I'll just show you the tab. So as you can see, we're going to unmanic.ibracorp.io. Now, what if your application has multiple ports? So by default, Traefik picks up an exposed port for every app using the default Docker file. If for some reason the developer did not add this port to the Docker file or multiple ports are exposed, we may have to tell Traefik which port to use for the web UI. So for Unraid, find the app that you want to reverse proxy. Once you're in the template, scroll to the bottom and then you can add the label that we've got in our written guide. Now probably the next one that's going to hold some of you guys up is if you have an application that runs in HTTPS by default. Now you know from our Nginx proxy manager videos, in those scenarios you would change the scheme to HTTPS so that it could link the two up. With Traefik, all we need to do is add again another label and it will allow us to access it fine. So if you have an application that uses HTTPS to get access, even locally, then you'll need to add this label. So I don't really have anything in here that does, but if I go into just any container, we'll go to Unmanic again, for example. We'll click on add a label, and this is what the label is. So we're saying the Traefik HTTP load balancer server scheme value is of HTTPS, add that, and then that will give us our HTTPS link as well. So then it will know that I need to forward it onto a HTTPS endpoint rather than port 80 or HTTP. And now for the finale you've all been waiting for. We have a container, it's running, it's reverse proxied, it's working fine. Now we want to add Authelia. So in our guide, we've got the label that we want to add, but while we're here, we'll go to add another label. You can just call it auth, under the key, drop that in. And then we've got auth at file in as the value. So once you've done that, click on add and apply it. Now I went into an incognito tab, I've typed in unmanic.ibracorp.io, and sure enough, it's forwarded us on to Authelia, and we now know that Authelia is protecting that endpoint. How easy was that? So basically, any other container that you want to do that to, you just go ahead and add the label to it, and Authelia will automatically be applied. We don't need to copy and paste a large string of text or a large config file or anything like that. We just simply apply that one label and Authelia is over the top of it. And like we said earlier, back in our Traefik YML file, if we wanted to, you could add Authelia here and then automatically everything would have to go through Authelia first. So if you wanted to, that is also your option. Now, if you're like me and you can't seem to get to the Traefik web UI dashboard remotely from your subdomain address, here's what I did to get it working. Now, we will work on the template. I believe there's something in the template we can fix. But as I was explaining earlier, anything that doesn't work that way, we can get around it by adding it as a router and a service. So coming back to our file config YAML file, this is our dynamic file. We can say we've got add guard there. What I've done is add Traefik as well, given it this entry point. We've called it this rule. So I said it's accessible at this location. That's the service we want. Apply auth, and then the same for the service down here and where it's located. So I've given it the container name, which is Traefik, and the port, which is 8080. So now with that done, we can actually reach the Traefik web UI and we can access it remotely and it works fine. For those wondering, with the VM as well, this is the VM, so it is working via our subdomain too. So that works, we've tested that works. So all of our reverse proxy settings so far are working fine. All of our reverse proxies done. Keep in mind, guys, all this time that I've been showing you this stuff, we only really have to do it once. Once you've set it up, the way you like, you can come in later and add stuff and add middlewares and whatever else you like as you please. But that's pretty much it. On a basic level, once you've got this done, if we just add more containers, we just add the labels if we like, or if we want to hard code certain things, we can do that. Now I'm going to show you one extra bonus thing on top of the Authelia stuff, just real quick for you. So if we go into the UI for Traefik, we'll have a brief look at what's going on. So in here, it'll show us our routers, our services, and our middlewares. We've also got our TCP and UDP. So theoretically, we can have game servers going through this as well, which we might look at a future video. It's also looking at our two different providers. We've got Docker and we've got file options there too. Then we can actually connect it with a relatively new feature for Traefik, which is Traefik Pilot. If we click on this here, it'll ask you to sign up or sign in. Now, if you don't have an account, you can sign up. We've already got one, so we'll sign in. For those that are self-hosting, I will note that it does link up to a central place that isn't controlled by you. So if you're not into that type of thing, then you probably don't want to enable it. But for us, we think it's quite useful, and I'll show you why. If I just click on it now, our instance is now synchronizing to Traefik Pilot, which is based in the cloud. So in here, we're actually getting metrics now. So if we go to alerts, we can configure it to alert us when there's health or security issues and how we want it to alert us. So we can configure webhooks or an email. You can even then go down to the metrics and it will start giving you metrics on what's happening with your network. Now, why would you want to use that? Well, it's basically like a free status check page, because now if let's say we can't get to our reverse proxied address, instead we go to pilot.traefik.io, we're logged in. Here we are, we can see our server. So I've clicked register this instance and it's given us a token. So again, make sure this token stays private. I will change it later. We'll click copy and it tells you exactly where it needs to go. So it needs to go into our Traefik.yml. So down the bottom here, just go down to the bottom. So copy that as is, then head to your Traefik YML, paste that in the bottom. Make sure it's saved. Now, again, this is in our static file. So what we then need to do is restart our container. wait for that to restart. So we'll reload our UI now that we've restarted the container. In the top right corner, we'll open it up and we can see that this instance has now been connected to our account. So if we click on this, we can see its name. We can even rename it and say Osiris2, for example. This is when we deployed it earlier, so you can see it's still got it there, but it doesn't pick up that it's registering anymore. So under Osiris2, for example, we can now see the metric and pick that particular instance. As you can imagine, it's really useful for multiple services. You've got multiple sites that you're running. You want to look at it in one place. So under pilot.traefik.io now, we can access this anywhere, even if our network is down. And if it is down, it'll give us an idea on what's happened, so we can have a look and say, oh, we got a peak at this time, and then it looks like it dropped off at about 12 p.m, for example. Or what's our duration looking like? What's the last week and the last month? I think it's a nice little tool and something that you could really use, but here's the real cherry on top, just to finish this video on the highest note possible. If you look in the left-hand side, we have an option called plugins. Again, you can also do this in the actual domain that you've got, or local address, whatever it is that you're using. But if you go to plugins, you have a whole list of plugins that you can literally click and install. So why bother watching a YouTube video on how to fix log4shell? You can pretty much just come in here, click on details, click and paste this stuff that it's telling you to, and away you go. How easy is that? So log4shell mitigation, do you want to avoid it? Perfect. Grab this static code here, paste it in your static file. If it's in your dynamic file, paste it there as well. Here's what they give you. Done. Don't have to worry about log4shell anymore. You've also got all these other ones. You've got fail to ban built in. So those who have complained that Nginx Proxy Manager doesn't really have that, I fully agree with you, and here's an easy way to do it. How easy is that? Click on details, add this to your config file, and away you go. You've got fail to ban running. Do you want JWT middleware? Do you want LDAP authentication? Keycloak middleware? The list goes on, and this gives you everything that you might possibly imagine. So guys, we've reached the end of the guide. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Like I said, this was one of our super detailed guides that took a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of commitment from our team and from our community. We couldn't have done it without our community members, and that includes you guys watching our YouTube videos. So thank you very much for your support. Again, a big thank you to Hawks and Bosian for their working on the documentation all these last few months. This has been one of the most elusive subjects out there, and we now hope that it'll help you get started with Traefik and help you get your reverse proxy on an enterprise level, whether it be at home or at your business. If you enjoy what we do, please think about supporting us. You can see our links down in the description below. At the very least, please like the video and subscribe. It really helps YouTube get us out there to others who might enjoy our work as well. And like I said, for those who like using Docker and Docker Compose instead of Unraid, we'll have a lot more content for you moving forward as well, as we try to do more alongside each other to help all of our different community members benefit from our guides as well. If you have any feedback, drop it in the comments below or in our Discord. We'd love to see you there. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next IBRACORP video.